Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 8. Now we know. Science fiction, fantasy, time travel. This is the Stories Told podcast, talking about worlds of stories told, from movies to TV shows and, of course, books. I am E.W. Barnes, fiction author and avid fan of great stories. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds, thousands of stories told. Let's begin. Don't forget to vote on what we talk about next. In the show notes below, there is a link to a private Facebook group where I've posted a poll. You can choose one of the options listed or offer a suggestion of your own. And today we're talking about the last episode in this first season of The Rings of Power. After this, I'll be talking about whatever I want until someone asks for something else, which is a win-win for me. We're diving into episode 8 of the new Lord of the Rings series, The Rings of Power, which is streaming now on Amazon. And as you know by now, beyond here, there will be spoilers. So if you've not already seen the show and don't want to know what's going to happen, now's the time to click over to the International Space Station live feed. It's very cool. This episode is entitled Alloyed, which I thought was an apt title. The episode touched on 3 main storylines: the Stranger, the Men of Numenor, and the Elves of Eregion. We see the Stranger after he has left the Harfoots. We are told he's in Erin Gallen, which is the Greenwood, the forest that would later be known as Mirkwood. There he is lured to the priestesses, who call him Lord Sauron. They show him the stars he's been looking for, and they tell him he is not yet in control of his powers. In Numenor, Pharazôn is preparing for the death of Miriel's father, Tar Palantir. He hires artists to capture the king's likeness so that he can be immortalized, since immortality is not available to men. One of the artists is Elendil's daughter, Eärien, who is with the king when he starts hallucinating that she is Miriel. He tells her to go to the Palantir, but to not use it as much as he did. The Númenóreans who came to the aid of the men in the Southland are now returning to their island. There is a great scene between Elendil and Queen Miriel as they ponder the sacrifices they have made as members of the faithful. Elendil, his son Isildur, and Miriel, her sight. But as they arrive home, they are greeted by the black banners that announce the death of the king, Miriel's father. Meanwhile, Galadriel arrives in Eregion with Halbrand, who is barely staying in his saddle. With elvish medicine, Halbrand is healed, and then Celebrimbor finds him in his workshop. Halbrand flatters him and helps him find a way to use the small amount of mithril given to Elrond by Durin. Celebrimbor thanks Halbrand for his suggestion, and Halbrand says, "Call it a gift." And then I knew for sure he was Sauron. I don't care what the priestesses said. I knew that Halbrand was Sauron because of his use of the word gift. In Tolkien's writings, Sauron called himself Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. There was also a deeply creepy moment between Halbrand and Galadriel, which reminded me of when he stole Galadriel's dagger back from Elendil, like a pickpocket, like someone who could not be trusted. The Elves of Eregion are trying to find a way to use the scant mithril Duril gave Elrond as a gift. First, they suggest a crown, to use the circular shape to enhance the mystical qualities of the ore. But the High King Gil-galad refuses to have so much power on one head alone, and I admired this decision from him. It was a sign of good leadership. I loved all the scenes of the smiths trying to work with the ore, with Halbrand in the middle of it all. First, Halbrand suggests blending the mithril with a lesser metal. Then, after they try forcing the metals together, he suggests coaxing the metals to bind together. But at this point, Galadriel is no longer on Team Halbrand. After Celebrimbor repeats a phrase that Adar said, quoting Sauron, she once again digs into the history of the kings of the Southland and discovers that the line of kings died out 1,000 years ago. When she confronts Halbrand with that truth, he confesses that he is Sauron, which means it's not the stranger, and it explains why, when Nori and the other Harfoots who followed the stranger to warn him about the priestesses are then menaced by the priestesses, the stranger reacts to save them with a battle reminiscent of the fight between Gandalf and Saruman in the movies. When the stranger destroys the priestesses, he turns them into moths, but not before they look very much like the Nazgul before they disappear. Nori and the stranger's story ends with both of them going off together to the east to find those star patterns he's searching for. But back to Galadriel and Halbrand/Sauron. Sauron urges Galadriel to join him. In a series of hallucinations, using scenes of her brother and the time they were trapped together on the raft, his coercions are strikingly similar to how he suggested the elves work with the mithril. He tries to bind his lesser quality of darkness with her light. He tries to coax her agreement, and he tries to force it. He tells her she could be stronger than the foundations of the earth, a line from both the book and the movies that Galadriel says when Frodo offers her the One Ring. But she sees through his attempts and fights back. He leaves her in the Glanduin River, where she is rescued by Elrond. But why didn't he kill her outright, now that she knows his secret? Galadriel races back to Celebrimbor's workshop and suggests that there be 3 items made of the mithril, saying 1 would corrupt, 2 would divide, but 3 would bring balance. Celebrimbor agrees, but says the metal that they use to bond with the mithril must be of the purest quality. They needed her dagger, the one that she took from her brother when she swore to stop Sauron. So why didn't Galadriel stop the rings from being made at all when it was something that Sauron specifically wanted? I think it was because without the rings, the elves would grow weary of Middle-earth and be forced to depart for the Undying Lands, and she wanted to stay so that she could complete her quest and rid the world of Sauron, and for that, she needed the power of the mithril. Giving up her brother's dagger was a sign of the change of her focus. No longer would she be a soldier against Sauron. Now she would use resistance to fight him instead of strength of arms only. In the last scene in this episode, we see Sauron overlooking the land newly named Mordor, watching Mount Doom in the distance. And so, who is the stranger? When the priestesses realize they have made a mistake, and the stranger is not Sauron, they say he is one of the Istar, who are the wizards sent to Middle-earth from the Undying Lands. And we've met 3 of them in the books: Gandalf, Saruman, and Radagast. There are also 2 blue wizards, who went to the east and are not heard from again. So which one is the stranger? We don't find out, though it's clear the writers want us to believe the stranger is Gandalf, with his affinity toward the hobbit-like Harfoots, and by having him tell Nori to follow her nose, as Gandalf said in Moria. But I don't believe he's Gandalf, and because of his healing of the trees in the Harfoot Grove, I'm leaning towards Radagast. So what do we know at the end of this season? We know who Sauron is. The 3 elven rings have been forged, and changes are afoot in Númenor. What do I think of the series overall? I thought it was good overall. I like the characters and the way the writers tied in a lot of known element from Tolkien's writings. Some drawbacks were that I think the writers relied too much on fan knowledge and could have spent more time grounding the series and its stakes. That being said, I looked forward to each episode every week, and I'm looking forward to Season 2. Another thing I noted with interest is how Feanor is present in all of these storylines. Feanor was an elf who lived in the Undying Lands until Morgoth stole his greatest creations, the Silmarils. That's what led to the war with Morgoth, for whom Sauron was just a lieutenant. Feanor died early in that war, but his family and his craft lived on, and Celebrimbor is his grandson. Even now, we still see references to him in the Mithril, which is supposed to have been created from one of the Silmarils, the Palantir, which was crafted by Feanor, and of course, in his grandson and his grandson's ambitions. I titled this podcast episode, Now We Know, because throughout this first season we've been teased with the identity of the main villain in the story. Now we know who he is, and in the second season we'll learn what he will do next. On a scale from 1 to 10, I give this episode a 9. And so, the questions left to be answered next season are, why didn't Sauron kill Galadriel? Is it because he truly cares about her? Or because he believes she might still join him? Or because he thinks the rings that he helped create will ultimately bring her to him? What about the other rings? The 7 of the dwarves, and the 9 that created the Nazgul. When will we see their creation? And who is the stranger? And that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for being here. Don't forget to vote in the poll on the Facebook group, and join me next time when we take things to the realm of science fiction and talk about one of my favorite episodes from Stargate SG-1. See you then.